The Chabad versus Chagas struggle is well known. The Alter Rebbe was a Talmud of the Maggids, and like all of his contemporaries, and as the expression goes, they ate out of the same bowl, but he took a different path, a distinctly different path. Part of the reason the Alter Rebbe took a distinctly different path is because the Alter Rebbe was a different kind of person, and he lived in a different kind of world. The Alter Rebbe was a Chassidic Rebbe in Liadi, which was, of course, the center and the stronghold of Torah at that time. And the Chassidus that he taught needed to reflect that intellectual bent and intensity that was consistent with the place in which he lived. Moreover, he personally was a Litvak. He was called a Litvak for that reason. And he was a man who obsessed over emes. He obsessed over integrity and personal truth, literally to the point of Mesiras Nefesh. And Chassidus Chabad reflects the Alter Rebbe. But of course, as the stories go, his contemporaries were not thrilled to discover that the Alter Rebbe had taken a different path. In fact, they were quite critical of the Alter Rebbe. The story is this. When the Holy Maggid passed away, there was a meeting. Right away, initially. And for the record, when the Holy Maggid passed away, there was a Ksav Hiskashnos, a document of Kabbalas Moros, of declaring loyalty to his son, the Holy Malach, Rabbi Avram the Malach, Rabbi Avram the Angel, who would survive his father by less than 4 years. He passed away right after Yom Kippur in Tovkuf Lamed Zayin, which is 4 years minus 2 months after his father. But many of the great Hasidic Rebbes to be accepted Rabbi Avram the Angel, Rabbi Avram the Malach, as their Rebbe after the Holy Maggid passed away. But immediately after the Maggid's passing, a meeting was held. And at that meeting, several decisions were reached. Number one, that a delegation of Hasidim would move to Israel to establish a Hasidic center in Eretz Yisrael, and that happened about 5 years later in Tovkuf Lamed Ches, after Pesach, and Mendel Lahorodaker, and Avram Kalasker, and Yisrael Polotsk made the trip to Eretz Yisrael. A second decision that was reached was that inasmuch as the struggle with the Misnagdim was concerned, Chassidus would remain an umbrella, would remain under one unified body. And of course, since it was such a wonderful task to be involved in the struggle against the Misnagdim, the Alter Rebbe was given the honor of leading that committee. The Alter Rebbe always did what nobody else wanted to do. And finally, a decision was reached that Chassidus would be allowed to diversify. In other words, the Maggid was the sole leader of the Hasidic movement. The Holy Baal Shem Tov was a Rebbe, and obviously he was the only Rebbe, the founder of the movement. When the Maggid succeeded him, he too was the only Rebbe of Hasidus. In fact, we know of his friends, like Reb Pinchas Koretzer, like Reb Michal Zlotchever, and others who were actually contemporaries of the Maggid, would come to Mezrich not as Hasidim and as Talmidim, but as acts of deference, of showing that he's the leader, and they, although they had their own shop, so to speak, their own enterprise, their own Hasidic path, but they were all submissive to the direction and the leadership of the Holy Maggid. Now the Maggid, during his lifetime, actually set up a pyramid system. The Maggid himself was involved only with the Chavraya Kadisha, only with the Tzaddikim, whom he personally selected to be in his inner circle in his movement. And when he was nostalgic, when he passed away, that pyramid system was retained. Instead of keep Hasidus centralized in one place, which was very, very difficult, travel was hard, the struggle with the Misnagdim was terribly intense and personal and painful, and it needed to be localized. Each Talmud of the Maggid became a Hasidic Rebbe in his own place and did his own thing. And there were terms, so to speak, negotiated. Number one, they divided up territories. They gave everybody a section of Eastern Europe. Most of the Hasidic Rebbes were in the Ukraine and in Podol, I guess what we would have called in a little bit of a later stage, Galicia, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and few were in Russia, in Lita and in Russia, because Chassidus had its roots in Galicia. It started in Poland and then the Ukraine, and the Misnagdim were very strong in Lita. So it took giants, it took very special personalities who were incredible Goinim and Nigle to even attempt to bring the Chassidus to Lita. So the Badicheve was initially in Lita, in Pinsk. Avram Kalski was in Kalisk. The Stoller, the Kalina Rebbes were in Karlin, and the Alter Rebbe was in Lozhne, and so on and so forth. And it was agreed that each one was entitled to teach Chassidus to his Chassidim within the territory that was designated to him as he saw fit, period. And this was the term, that's what they agreed to. And they also had agreed that every 5 years a meeting would be held where the Talmidim who were able would gather again and examine the progress of Chassidus in all three areas, both in terms of the efforts of sending a delegation to Eretz Yisrael, as well as how they were dealing with the Misnagdim, as well as how Chassidus was being disseminated and spread further and further based on this new pyramid system and this diversified system of Chassidus. So the first meeting was held in Tavkuf Lamed Gimel. That would be, 1772. The following meeting took place 5 years later, approximately, Tavkuf Lamed Zayin, Lamed Ches. The third meeting, and at that point, Mendel Hardaka went to Israel. There's a long story. The Alter Rebbe wanted to go along. He actually packed his bags and left, and then he went back to Lozhne. And the third meeting took place in Tavkuf Mem Gimel, 1783. Now understand that the Tanya would not be written for a decade. It wouldn't be published for a decade and a half. Yet already then, when the Alter Rebbe came to this meeting in Volin, he was severely criticized. He was attacked by his contemporaries, by his fellow Hasidic Rebbes, for going away from the Derech of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, introducing Chabad. Now, if you will look at the Hasidus of the Alter Rebbe from those years, you'll be hard pressed to find any Chabad. I mean, this is Maamar Maksarim generation, 3-liners. But the Tzaddikim ascertained correctly, based on the Torah of the Alter Rebbe and the information that reached them about how the Alter Rebbe was rearing Hasidim, that the Alter Rebbe had developed a derech of Chabad, and he was severely criticized. The Alter Rebbe took it very personally. It's hard to tell what caused the Alter Rebbe more pain, the Misnagdim or the condemnations that he got from his contemporaries, from his own friends. It was very painful to him. And the previous Rebbe in the Likutei Torah, where he tells the story, actually lists a whole bunch of Talmidim who stood with the Alter Rebbe. In other words, the majority of the Chavraya Kadisha criticized the Alter Rebbe, but there were quite a few who stood with him. And it's really the most famous names, the Badicheve, Reb Nachum Chernobyl, the Rebbe Reb Melech, Naim Elimelech, Reb Zusha, and so forth. But most of them came down very hard on him, and the Alter Rebbe was very pained by it. And of course his argument was, we had agreed that each was entitled to teach Chassidus as they saw fit. And of course the response was, we had agreed that you're entitled to teach Chassidus as we see fit. This is not Chassidus, this is something altogether different. What they did not know, of course, was that the Holy Maggid had given the Alter Rebbe these instructions during his lifetime. When the Alter Rebbe met the Maggid for the first time, the Maggid said to the Alter Rebbe, I have messages for you from the Baal Shem Tov, who told me all about you, and your being a new soul, a new neshama, and so on and so forth. And the spirit of what the Maggid, the Holy Maggid, gave over to the Alter Rebbe in the name of the Baal Shem Tov was that he was to create a model for Chasidus that would allow Chasidim to make Chasidus pnimius, meaning to say, it would allow Chasidim to internalize Chasidus and make it their own, rather than be Chasidim by association with a Rebbe and a Tzaddik. In other words, what was the big difference between Chabad and Chagas, between the other Hasidic drachim, paths, and that of the Alter Rebbe's? The argument was that Chassidus is very precious and very, very holy and very sacred. And like the Alter Rebbe explained to the Pinchas Koretzer, if earlier generations were unworthy and undeserving of Chassidus, we're certainly unworthy and undeserving of Chassidus. Yet, it's been revealed to us because now it's no longer a question of worthiness, it's a question of survival. if you don't take the precious stone, which is the foundation of the king's crown, and grind it up into a powder and feed it to the dying prince and hope he survives, no point in preserving a crown if you don't have a crown prince. No point in preserving the secrets of the Torah if you're not going to have the consumers of those secrets, which are the Jewish people. So clearly, Chassidus was revealed because it was desperately necessary. But the argument went, let the tzaddikim have the Chassidus and let everybody else only experience the inspiration of Chassidus through the tzaddik. V'tzaddik b'munasa yichya, al tikri yichya, ele yechaya. Tzaddik is one special individual. Everybody else is not a tzaddik. The tzaddik is passionate and inspired and in tune with God. And by association, everybody else is also inspired. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya Perek Lamed Gimel, chapter 33, says no, the tzaddik goes on every single one of us. And b'munasai means the faith or the access to our own soul, which we inspire through our own efforts of Chabad, Chochmah, Bina, Das, mind, inspiring heart, accessing soul, so that my whole religious identity is centered on its soul, which is faith, and all the other mitzvahs radiate from that faith with passion and, relatively speaking, with ease, with life, with enthusiasm, rather than with reluctance and drag. And the Alter Rebbe said every Jew must inspire himself. In other words, what is the role of the tzaddik? In Chagas, the role of the tzaddik is to inspire the Chassidim. In Chabad, the role of the tzaddik was to teach Chassidim how to inspire themselves. And consequently, these two Chassidic paths diversified. And so many customs and traditions separate these two branches of Chassidus based on their principal differences. Just to give you one example, in other Hasidic communities, it was traditional to go to the Rebbe very often, several times a year. In Chabad, Hasidim made one trip a year and sometimes one trip in 2 years because it was a different concept. You weren't going to the Rebbe to be recharged and inspired, you were going to the Rebbe to get an education. You took that education home and you inspired yourself. So these are very, very distinct paths, very, very distinct paths. And like I said to you, there's so many stories that reflect these differences. There was a great Hasidic Rebbe named Rabbi Solovey. He's mentioned in the previous Rebbe's, in the Rebbe's diary, the Rebbe's journal, in the Rishimis, and the Rebbe mentioned him by Fabrengen. The Friedrich Rebbe knew some stories about Rabbi Solovey. I would imagine he heard them when he was in Vienna in 1903, but I don't know. He was a Baal Ruach HaKodesh Nifla. He was an incredibly godly man. And he had open eyes. He saw and knew everything. And he had Chassidim. And amongst his Chassidim were some that were truly inspired people. Truly inspired people. And the Tzemach Tzedek was once shown. Tzemach Tzedek was a contemporary of the Viledniks. They lived at the same time. Rabbi Yisrael of Vilednik, that's his name. And somebody pointed out to the Tzemach Tzedek that there was a Viledniker Chassid davening with extraordinary passion, unbelievable inspiration, enthusiasm. So the Tzemach Tzedek commented, "Das davent nicht der, das davent der Viledniker," which means in English, this is not him praying. His Rebbe is embodying, is embedded within him, and the Rebbe is davening through him. The point that he was making was that this Chassid's inspiration was not the Chassid, it was his Rebbe. Like I told you the story in one of our recent classes about Rabbi Kosia Lepler. You know, the Alter Rebbe made him into a tzaddik. So he was very inspired. But in the Chabad world, that wasn't honorable because it's all about avodah b'koyach atzmei. It's about your own effort, your own inspiration, your own struggle. And if the Rebbe inspires you and gives you a freebie, if you will, that's exactly what it's worth. Another story, which I believe I've shared with you in the past, that Rabbi Shlomo Karliner, who was in Russia, in Lite, along with the Alter Rebbe, and a very outspoken critic of the Alter Rebbe's. He disagreed in principle with the Alter Rebbe's derech. He was, derech agav, coincidentally, he was killed, he was murdered al Kiddush Hashem in Tovkov Nun Beis in 1792 in Tammuz. And in the Karliner dynasty, they call him Mashiach ben Yosef, who it says in Chazal, it's based on Psukim and in Chazal, that he's going to be killed al Kiddush Hashem. he came to the Alter Rebbe in Lozhne and brought with him a chassid. And he introduced this chassid to the Alter Rebbe and said to the Alter Rebbe, this is my chassid, not Chabad, doesn't learn Chassidus, doesn't inspire himself through effort, he's inspired directly by me, and he lives on Amunah, and he has Gili Eliyahu. Eliyahu Hanavi visits him. Elijah the prophet frequents him, it's pretty cool to be visited by Eliyahu Hanavi. So the Alter Rebbe turns and he points to Rabbi Yamin Kletzker. Rabbi Yamin Kletzker was one of the giants in the Alter Rebbe's family, in the Alter Rebbe's Chabuda, the Alter Rebbe's community. And he points at Rabbi Yamin Kletzker and he says, "Und ot steht und der junger Mann steht menesre und halt jetzt der Sim Sholem und bei ihm ist mehr Yechidish Nefesh und lacht von sein Gili Eliyahu." He says, and this young man is currently standing Shmenesre and he's holding Sim Sholem, and his neshama, the level of the Yechida, is revealed. He's experiencing the very essence of his neshama, and he's laughing at your chassid Gili Eliyahu. And the point was, of course, that the Alter Rebbe was saying this is a Chabad chassid who, through his own efforts, had achieved levels in avodah which are far greater than the idea of the madrege of Gili Eliyahu. This is Chabad. This is Chabad. This is the real, serious Chabad, what we call avodah b'koyach atzma. You have to do the work yourself. And of course, we are much, much smaller people, but that principle still applies, that everybody has to do their own work, their own job, and so forth. Now, consequently, you have several Hayom Yoms, right? Several Hayom Yoms which make this case quite directly. For example, the Hayom Yom says to ask of a Rebbe a bracha, a blessing, for success in avodah, goes under the category of nirpim atem nirpim, which means you're soft and you're lazy. You don't ask a Rebbe for a bracha for avodah. Es darf sein tichbot avodah ala nosh. When it comes to pnimius, when it comes to our relationship with God, when it comes to work, the Rebbe is not there to make it easier for us. The Rebbe is there to make us struggle, to make us work. And if you come to a Rebbe and say, Rebbe, ease my spiritual burden, that's laziness. I don't know if I've told you this story, but the second Kozhnitzer Rebbe was called the Moshe Kozhnitzer, the Moshe Yaakov Bereya of Kozhnitz. And one of his greatest disciples was the first Ger Rebbe, the Chidusha Harim, the Bitcher Meir of Ger, who in those days was called the Chemei Varshavin, the young man. And he did something for his Rebbe, which pleased his Rebbe very much, who said to him, Itchemayer, ich wollte dich zerkischt. He said, Itchemayer, I would love to kiss you. So the young Ger Rebbe said, Ich darf nicht a Rebbe, was kusht mir, ich darf haben a Rebbe, was reißt für mir Sticker. I don't need a Rebbe who kisses me, I need a Rebbe who cuts pieces from me. And he left, never went back to Kozhnitz. He went to Kotsk. Mamish, on his deathbed, he sent a delegation to ask Mechila from his prior Rebbe, and only when they came back and told him that they had fulfilled his mission did he close his eyes. He was nostalgic. This is a Chabad-like story. Of course, on a Rebbe, on a level of tzaddikim, which is a much higher level. Another Hayom Yom is, Hecher is as me fiert farnhand, tired it is as me geht allein. You know, it's of course, when you're being led, when you're being inspired, you're much higher. But when you travel on your own road and you take your own steps, it's much more precious, it's much more meaningful, it's much more real because it's much more earned. And in Chabad, that emphasis, that priority, certainly is very, very real. How does all this tie in to the Maamar Adam Ki Yakriv? It ties into the Maamar because this Maamar addresses, amongst other things, the question of milmayla lamata or milmata lamayla. That means, in other words, is our avodah beginning with an inspiration from God, or is our avodah beginning with a self-inspiration? Now, we're close enough to Pesach to talk about this, so I'm going to talk about it. In Elul, we always talk about Ani l'doidi v'doidi li, right? Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Ani l'doidi v'doidi li. And of course, Ani l'doidi, Ani goes on the person. I approach my friend, my doidi, and doidi, my friend, which is God, which is Hashem, li responds to me. Well, when it comes to Pesach, there's a different pasuk also in Shir Hashirim that says, Doidi li, my friend reaches towards me, v'ani lo, and I reciprocate, I respond in kind. And the Mitzvah Shem, next week, when we're going to finish this Maamar, you're going to see how this Maamar actually fits the Pesach model rather than the Tishrei model. In other words, what's the difference between Pesach, which culminates in Shavuos, it's one Yom Tov really, and Elul, that culminates in Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, which is one series of Yom Tovs. The difference is Elul is a season of tshuva. We reach to God and God responds. Nisan is a season of redemption. God redeems us and we react, we respond. So it starts from the top, it starts from God. So which is preferred? Is it preferred that God initiates and we react to Him, or is it preferred if we do tshuva and God responds to us? And the answer is, when God initiates and inspires, it's higher. When we do tshuva on our own, it's not higher, but it's more precious, it's more meaningful, it's more valuable. In other words, we have both holiday seasons each year precisely because both are important and both have merit and worth and so forth. This Maamar makes a very sensitive argument. And the argument is, we will, on occasion, get an inspiration from above. Don't suffice with riding its wave. In other words, when people are jolted, people are aroused, people are inspired, they don't know from where. And obviously it's coming from the Eibishter. It's Arusa de Liela, an arousal from above. So of course, at the very least, we're going to be more in tune to our ruchniistic selves, be more proactive in our learning, in our davening, in our precision in doing mitzvahs, because we're inspired. But no inspiration lasts forever. And if we simply ride the wave of this inspiration, and then when it crests, when it breaks, we're depressed by the lack of inspiration, you can almost say we wasted it. I mean, you cannot say we wasted it because we took advantage of it while it was there, but we didn't capitalize on it. Capitalizing on that inspiration means to say, God inspires us. Take advantage of it and run with it. Run with it in such a way that even when the divine inspiration passes, the effect of the divine inspiration will continue. And that's the unique argument of this Maamar, that although it is true that when one gets an inspiration from above, and forgive me for saying this, the Chagas-like idea, where God comes and inspires us, we can Chabadify, we can earn, we can personalize, we can invest in that inspiration in such a way that we're not simply enjoying the inspiration, but we're translating that inspiration into an effort of inspiration from within ourselves that will allow the inspiration from above to endure beyond its own energy and passion. And then we're making what is something from without, something that's outside of ourselves, real and genuine. And that's the model of this Maamar. This Maamar, in my opinion, I'm really not sure, but it seems to me is very similar to Tanya chapter 9, Tanya Perek Tes, and I think I said this in the first class last week. Tanya chapter 9 also describes struggle, but he describes it in the following order. You study in your mind, you meditate in your mind, and you arouse feelings in the right side of your heart, the right ventricle of the heart, which is where the neshama is, the nefesh halakis. And that the neshama should be so moved, so aroused, so inspired, that it spills over to the left ventricle of the heart, where the passion is, where the animal soul is, and then it spills over from the heart to the whole person until you, so to speak, conquer your whole self. The model of that Pedic is, you start with the mind, you start with the nefesh halakis, you start with the right side of the heart, which is as passionate as the nefesh halakis is ever going to get, which isn't very passionate altogether, and then inspire the animal from the top down, from godly soul to animal soul. This is really atypical. It's not the normal procedure. The normal procedure is, you want to have a connection to God, the first thing you have to do is fight with the animal, with the obstacles. Tanya chapter 9 doesn't seem to be describing an animal. It's simply describing a need for inspiration. So you start with the godly soul, with the cold and collected and thoughtful and deep mind and inner heart, and have it spill over to the more external and passionate heart and to the whole person, which is the realm of the animal soul. This Maamar follows a similar path, that God inspires, and the inspiration of God touches only the godly soul. It doesn't reach the animal soul. And then we must take advantage of that inspiration, that it doesn't remain only in the godly soul, in which case we'd be almost wasting what God is giving us, but instead have it spill over into our animal self, so that when the divine inspiration passes, we have not only used the inspiration, but we have maximized its purpose by making the inspiration that the neshama that God gave us something that touches and transforms the animal soul as well. And that's the spirit of this Maamar. And it's time. We're 26 minutes and 4 seconds into the class. Don't you think it's time to start learning? Line 46. Vezehu, and this explains Adam ki Yakriv mikem. One of the questions that was raised at the beginning of this Maamar is that it begins in singular. Adam, a person, ki Yakriv, who will make a sacrifice. Mikem, from amongst you. Then it says, the various different species of animals that can be used for sacrifice. Takrivu, you, in plural, will sacrifice as karbanchem, your sacrifices. And the Alter Rebbe observes, why begin in single tense and end in plural tense? And the answer is because he's beginning with an inspiration that touches only the godly soul, and then he finishes with translating or capitalizing on that inspiration that touches only the divine soul, that it should trigger the animal soul as well, which is the Lashon Rabim, the plural tense, the divine soul and the animal soul. And in general, the animal soul is split into many parts. So he's many even without the godly soul. And that's what the Pasuk is saying. Adam, the allusion to Adam, man, doesn't mean the person. Adam ki Yakriv mikem doesn't mean a human being who's bringing a sacrifice from himself. Adam means Hashem. Adam Ha'elyon, when godliness is Yakriv mikem, wants to bring a person closer to him. Says the Rebbe, as the Pasuk says, Valdemus HaKisi, sitting on the divine throne, is the most Kamari Adam, is the likeness of an image of Adam. And Adam goes on godliness, Adam goes on Atzilus. Please don't ask me to explain it, because I'm not going to anyway. Although the truth is that Lav Mikol Ilin Midas Ihu Klau, godliness truly is beyond any midah, any measure, any attribute, any division and form and order. Ella, but nevertheless, godliness comes down to the 10 spheres of Atzilus, or the 10 midas of Atzilus. Like Alter Rebbe describes it in Shara Yechad Ve'emunah. Ein Sof is one and plain, and the Chachmei Ha'emes, the Kabbalists, were given permission to speak in spheres. This is how godliness descends to a level where it is at least sufficiently available to us, because godliness is expressing itself in midas, in individual attributes, and that's called Adam. How godliness has been made into the supernal man. And Adam, how godliness has manifested at the level of the supernal man, is touching a Yid from the top down. V'nikra, and Atzilus Adam Ha'elyon is also called Ramach, even in the Malchut, the 248 limbs. Because since godliness in the model of Adam is the supernal man, she or it can relate to the human man, Adam HaTachton, because we have these similarities, and it can illuminate us and our world with godliness in all the worlds. And as godliness comes down into the form of Atzilos, Nikra Kamari Adam, it's called the image of man, and it's also called Shir Kaim. Now notice the small type. We made this modification on our own. Most of this small type is not in the original. I explained this to you last week. This is one of those rare Maimorim in Likutei Torah where most of the notes of the Tzemach Tzedek are not put in parentheses. And consequently, it's very difficult to know what's the Alter Rebbe's and what's the Tzemach Tzedek's. And frankly, we're not absolutely sure, but clearly when you have a pile of source material references, it's not the Alter Rebbe, it's the Tzemach Tzedek. So we didn't put it in parentheses. We didn't feel comfortable adding a parenthesis where the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek didn't place it, but we allowed ourselves to make smaller letters, because I'm going to skip those parts, and it allows you to see what is, in all likelihood, Tzemach Tzedek's notes as opposed to the Alter Rebbe's original. So we move on to line 51. And this is what the pasuk is saying. Adam, godliness as it is manifest to the level of Adam, ki Yakriv, wants to bring the person down here in this world closer to godliness. It's bringing forward. It's an arousal from above. As Adam Elyon from the supernal man from godliness. Lahakriv leiv ha'adam shal mata, to bring close the heart of the person as he is down here, lahavaya, to godliness. As the pasuk says, kemayim aponim leponim, as water reflects the face that looks into it, and you look into a mirror, you see yourself. Kain leiv ha'adam la'adam, the same is true. The heart of man reflects the heart that's looking into it. When you love somebody and you look at them, they love you back. It's a pasuk in Mishlei, and of course, Adam goes on the human being, and the other Adam goes on Adam Ha'elyon. And the point is, when Adam Ha'elyon loves us, we love her back, or we love him back, we love it back. V'zehu, I'm skipping the smaller type. Ki Yakriv mikem, that Adam godliness inspires mikem, the person down here. Mikem, mamish, it means not sacrificing an animal, but sacrificing or bringing close the human being, sheyakriv es nefesh adam shal mata, that the human being as he is down here should be brought close, lahavaya, to godliness. V'lachei number, which is the simplest explanation for why it says adam ki yakriv mikem, because adam doesn't go on the person, adam goes on godliness. Mikem goes on the person. So adam, that godliness, adam ha'elyon, is yakriv mikem, is trying to bring a person closer to the Eibishter. Acharei emrei ki yakriv. First he says, Adam ki Yakriv. Adam Elyon wants to bring a sacrifice, and then he uses the word mikem. V'layamar Adam mikem ki Yakriv, rather than put the word mikem before ki Yakriv. Because she'im kain, if the words mikem appeared before the words ki Yakriv, Adam would have to mean the person. Adam, a person, mikem, in your community, ki Yakriv. But by putting the mikem after, Adam and mikem are allusions to two different Adams. This is Adam Elyon, and this is the person. Because if it said Adam mikem ki Yakriv ho ya pirush, the only way to interpret the pasuk would be rakib shutei levad, its simple interpretation. Adam gashmi lamata Yakriv, a person on here is making a sacrifice. But since it says Adam ki Yakriv mikem, that Adam is bringing a sacrifice from amongst you. Ram, as this order and these words are also alluding to another idea, el inyan hanal, to the aforementioned concept that Adam ha'elyon, godliness, is trying to bring us closer to the Eibishter. Adam, Atzilus, Ki Yakriv, when it inspires mikem, a human being down here, to bring him closer to HaKadosh Baruch. V'lachein, I'm on line 57. V'lachein emer Ki Yakriv lashon yachid. That's why it says Adam Ki Yakriv, when man will bring a sacrifice singular, because godliness is only one. The koyal Adam ha'elyon, it's an allusion to Atzilus. Shehu echad, that he is only one. So the pasuk begins referring to God's inspiration, Adam ki Yakriv, and what do you want to inspire mikem, the human being, the neshama, and skip the next line. And of course, then the pasuk follows up and says, that when you bring the sacrifice, you sacrifice the animal as well. In other words, the godly inspiration touches a yid, but it touches only his neshama, as you'll see momentarily. The yid shouldn't suffice with his neshama responding to the Adam Elyon's inspiration. Because if that were the case, he would be wasting it. He has to take advantage of the Adam Elyon's inspiration to now inspire his animal. And the korban should be not just his neshama coming closer to the Eibishter, which is responding to the Adam ki Yakriv, but his animal soul, which means that he's taking an inspiration from God and earning it after the fact, making it his own, chabadifying it. This is an allusion to the sacrifice the person down here brings. Which is why it says takrivu in plural, because plural means many Jews. There are many Jews, and if I may add, every Jew has many pieces. The Eibishter is one, the Jew is many. Like, of course, the famous story with the Rabbi Yitzchak Avrucher, who was the Friedrich Rebbe's maternal grandfather. He was named after him. That when he married the daughter of Rabbi Yakriv of Cherkas, who was a non-Chabad Chassidic Rebbe, his father-in-law wanted to make sure that he davened quickly, as was the culture in many Hasidic communities outside of Chabad. And of course, in Chabad, real people davened all day long. So his shver, his father-in-law, said to him, how do you daven? So he answered cryptically, Ich bin sich mishtadel to daven in Betzibur. I try to daven Betzibur, which means with a quorum, with a community. So he was happy. The next day, of course, his son-in-law davened all day long. So he summoned him and said, I thought you daven Betzibur. He said, sure, I do. This is what took you all day. He says, well, tzibur means what? To gather. I spent all day long gathering the split parts of myself together so that all of me would daven. That's how Chassidus actually translates the word Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael means collect yourself, get yourself together, like by Shama Shol. Similarly, tzibur means to get yourself together. And therefore, the neshama's inspiration is Yachid, Adam, but the neshama's touching the animal soul is Lashon Rabim, is plural. Line 61. Says the Rebbe, this is simply good counsel that God Almighty gives. That immediately based when you feel an inspiration coming from on high. So an arousal comes from above. It is nefesh adam, to arouse the person's neshama. You must not only enjoy the inspiration, but you must counter the inspiration. To arouse an inspiration from below, which involves not just the neshama riding the wave of divine inspiration, but the animal soul being harnessed and dragged, perhaps in the Lashon of the Tanya, kicking and screaming into Avodas Hashem. To bend, so that ultimately we can transform. As there's nefesh habahamis, the passionate emotions of the animal soul, and make them servants of God. Which is how the pasuk finishes. I'm on line 63 now. Yakriv was karbanchem, the sacrifice that we bring in response to the Adam ki Yakriv is our animal. We're sacrificing our animal, and specifically the different types of animals. As I'm going to discuss momentarily. So the model is when God inspires from above. It has the downside of being undeserved, unworthy, almost chagas-like, poilin. But we have the option of chabanifying it, not by reacting to it, but by bringing the behema into it. In other words, taking the part of ourselves that's most reluctant to be involved in godliness and force him or her to serve the Eibishter as well. And one of the details of the pasuk which reflects this idea is the fact that it starts off in singular, godly soul, and ends in plural, godly soul and animal soul. When he brings another pasuk, and this pasuk we're going to have now, but in Mitzvah Hashem next class we're going to visit it much more thoroughly. Which goes as the pasuk says, Mashcheni. A Yid says to God Almighty, drag me, raise me up, inspire me from on high, and we will follow after you. So Mashcheni means drag me. Acharecha narutza means we will follow after you, which is plural, Pirush. Kasher mashcheni b'thrusa d'lielu, when we have an inspiration from on high, which is called mashcheni yad miyad acharecha narutza. We won't simply enjoy the ride, but we will chase after the inspiration, and we will include in the chase the animal soul, which makes the carbon a chabad carbon and makes the carbon our own efforts. But if one wastes this prospect and doesn't exert himself, to engage in work, levad and nefesh habahamis, to bring clarity and purpose to the passions of the animal soul, as I so then. It's true, there is an inspiration, there is an arousal of the godly soul. To arouse the godly soul, it's not going to last, it's certainly not going to be consistent. Because the godly soul, like Kusya Lepler used to say, Chassid prishal, Chassid ushal. The Chassid came, the Chassid left. Or as we say in our culture, easy come, easy go. If the neshama is inspired from on high, it's easy come, and consequently it's easy go. Aval kasher miyad. But when immediately, sha'odam ha'elyon Yakriv became carbon, when the godly energies of Adam ha'elyon try to embrace and bring close the godliness within the person, when God initiates a relationship with us, and we take advantage of it. As I take, if a Jew is told, take advantage of the inspiration, that it be not only an inspiration for a temporary spiritual excursion, but that it become translated into our avodah lives. That's consistent. It's by lahakriv es korbancha min habehema v'chuli. We have to introduce our animal into the scheme, and azayeh davar amiskayim, which gives it permanence, which makes it last. Line 72. Now we understand the pasuk. Adam means godliness. Yakriv wants to bring the Jew's godly soul closer to the Eibishter, and the Jew responds not by just enjoying that trip, but by sacrificing his animal as well. Line 72. The carbon that we do reciprocally is min habehema v'choli, includes our animal. While mash enkein adam ki Yakriv, when God and godliness inspired the neshama, hin yakor benu mikem, the possibility of coming near to God based on inspiration from above is limited mikem to your godliness, to your godly soul. Vaina commission is bayel, as we discussed last week. Shebechol echad, each yid yesh bechinas nefesh alakiz v'nefesh habahamis, has a godly soul and an animal soul. And the inspiration that God gives us touches only the godly soul. It doesn't reach low enough to inspire the animal soul unless we engage. When godliness comes closer and brings us closer to the Eibishter, it's an inspiration from above. Chanin brought down from on high, to awaken, and to bring close. Nefesh ha'adam shalmata, the spirit of the person down here in this world, says the Rebbe, I have a secret for you. Hine ha'adazu, this arousal. Magia reaches and touches only l'nefesh alakis levad, to the divine soul alone. Shu chelik alakami mal, it's a portion of godliness. V'nikir neira v'aynish masadam, and it's a fire of passion for Hashem by nature. Shu bechinas adam, which is an allusion to the Adam, the man within the human experience, because we are Nasa Adam B'Tameinu Kidmuseinu, in the image of godliness on high. Skipped a few smaller words. V'yesh ba, and in the godly soul there is avativis, a natural love. Mitzat shar shamaker chutzbah, based on where it comes from, to God. Rak she mitzuteres, it's concealed. V'tzarach leitziyim and helam alagil, needs to be aroused. And when the Eibishter comes along and triggers or tickles our neshama, it's aroused. Al-Kain, therefore, when God reveals himself and arouses us from above, this love is emerging from its hidden state, to a revealed state. To be like a candle in the presence of a torch. But you know what? There's no struggle in that. There's no effort and initiative in that. This is simply us responding to godliness. So we're not really changing. We're just enjoying the spiritual trip, if you will. And when the godliness passes, we've wasted it. Now, just a detail. Also, Tanya chapter 9, when he discusses the difference between the godly and animal souls, one of the points that comes out quite clearly is that the godly soul is quiet and deep. The animal soul is passionate and demonstrative and dynamic. And the inspiration of godliness, which is very, very real and very, very moving, is also quiet and deep. Now, quiescence and depth is arguably truer than passion and demonstrativeness. But you know what? That's the language of the animal soul. And as human beings, as Jews living in the real world, we must engage the animal soul, even if it means going away from quiescence and depth towards passion and demonstrativeness, so that we as people, which means our animal soul as well, are servants of Hashem. It's part of the price that we pay to serve Hashem in this world, is to raise up our animal selfish self by speaking its language, which is the language of passion. And this is what he says on line 79. Aval, however, Nefesh Abraham is the animal soul. Shakvar Yord has already descended into this world. Uklu Lomitei Varan, it's an entanglement of good and evil. Moreover, in this world, it's predominantly evil. It's impossible to say that the animal soul has a hidden love for God that needs to be revealed. The consequence of this is the person's neshama can be incredibly inspired, and the animal soul is out of the picture. It doesn't have any relationship with, and by itself doesn't touch the animal soul and the body. The godly soul is ascending upward in this inspiration. Im kol zeh, and at the same time, the animal soul is lost out of the picture and descending downwards. Allah, and the answer to this problem is that's what we need to do. To use the inspiration, to engage in a struggle to bring clarity to our animal soul. And based on that struggle, we would be called Eved Elikim, servants of Hashem. The word ibud means to work over, but it also denotes working over like people work over animal skins, which means you have to pound away. With the Nefesh HaBahamis, you can't be a nice guy. He's a behemoth, and you have to harness a behemoth, as behemoths need to be harnessed. And when one does that successfully, they've quieted the animal soul, disciplined the animal soul, and refocused the animal soul. And that's what we're discussing. Line 83. As the Gemara says, there's an angel who's responsible for gestation, for pregnancy. He wonders about each neshama, what's going to be with it. He doesn't determine if we're going to be tzaddikim or rishoyim, because as the Gemara says, whether we're going to be righteous or not is a personal choice. And in this context, the choice is not simply to serve Hashem, but the choice is to force ourselves, when in an inspired state, to engage the animal soul, to descend into his level, to inspire the animal soul as well, so that there's reality and permanence to this inspiration. Which is why when the godliness is reaching towards us and inspiring us, it's only touching the godly aspect in ourselves, which is what the word mikem denotes. In other words, Lashon mikem, when godliness touches us, hainu nefesh elokis levad, touches only the godly soul. Aval kor banchem, when the human being responds, not simply by writing its inspiration, but by giving and inspiring and sacrificing the animal passions as well. Korbanchem hi, our sacrifices min, ha-behema v'chuli, we sacrifice our passions and animalism. Hainu levadet ha-nefesh ha-bahamis, to bring clarity to our animal soul, first by bending ourselves. And ultimately, v'ishapcha, by transforming ourselves, ayedei yais bananus begedulas havaya, by engaging and contemplating the greatness of God. Now, it's easy to talk about the greatness of God. Philosophy is not hard. Philosophy is very engaging and interesting. But we don't want to talk philosophy. We want to talk philosophy that moves. And if we want to speak to the animal soul about philosophy that moves, it better be animal philosophy. The animal soul has to understand, as an animal, that this is good for her. Kirvas alikim li tev. So you have to think about the Eibishter. But on line 86, kifi asher sichle yuchal seis, to the measure that his mind can tolerate, lehelid mizeh ahava aza, to arouse passions, love, but passionate and demonstrative love, which is gam b'nefesh ha-bahamis, the language of the animal soul. And of course, first we have to have discipline. First we have to just do the right thing and not do the wrong thing. Then we have to transform ourselves by inspiring ourselves. So the pasuk is saying, Adam, godliness ki Yakriv mikem, can reach down and bring close our godly soul. We shouldn't suffice with that experience. We should immediately translate into minna behema, minna bakar, minna tzain, takrivu es karbanchem, so that something which is by itself really not so Chabadish will become Chabad-like. Gam pirush minna behema, another detail in this pasuk, that when we say that godliness inspires our godly soul and we give the animal soul in return, we already mentioned it earlier. If you want to subdue and bring clarity to the animal of the person, you have to look at its source. Look at the angels. They're the source of the animal soul, which are called the faces of the oxen of the divine chariot. In other words, in order to inspire passions in our animal soul down here, we have to visit the passions of the animal soul's source in the animals or angels on high. Which is, of course, the reason why we say what the angels are doing before we recite the Shema as an introduction. Before we say the Shema. So the two blessings before, at least the first of those two blessings. deals with Eich Shamalach and V'chayes HaKedesh, how the various levels of angels. Magdishim Mamlichim V'chulu bring holiness and kingship to God. Shemiseh. And when we talk about angels, we don't talk about their intellectualism, we talk about their passion. And therefore, Dafka Tizbola Nefesh HaBahamis is going to arouse the animal soul. V'zehu, which is a deeper aspect. Min HaBehema Takrivu. You want to sacrifice your animal, you have to go to the animal source, which is the Pnei Shesha B'Merkava. Hainu B'Chein Pnei Shesha B'Merkava. So, Hashem inspires our godly soul, we spill it over to our animal soul, and we draw strength from the source of the animal soul. What about the ideas of min haboker min hatzein, from cattle and from goats and sheep? Says the Rebbe, Pirish min haboker min hatzein. When the pasuk then says that there are actually various animals that can be used in sacrifice, this is saying that the different types of animal soul, personalities, they're not all the same. Some are more passionate and angry, some are quiet and terribly, terribly lustful. Yesh mishum b'chinas bakar. Some have the animal soul of a bull. Kishe nagachu, he's like a raging bull. B'chinas gvuras kashas, very intense strength. Vaina mishu kaisan b'tiv, and usually such people have anger issues. Shami derazuhi beibitak beidas yesen. Such people have a greater tendency towards anger because they're just very animalistic, very passionate. And they're nicknamed bakar, cattle, because of this passion. There's an animal soul, is quiet, he's casual, laid back, doesn't get too upset about anything. But you know what? That's also a behemoth. What makes his behemoth? He quietly enjoys every indulgence, every lust, every imaginable temptation. His animal soul is like a goat or like a sheep. Small little animal, what we call in halacha a behema daka. She'ena nagchonim, they're not passionate and angry. Adarabba kelim barachmanas, their bleat is quite moving because it seems to arouse compassion. But there's nothing godly about it. They live for another temptation. Well, the one has a passionate animal soul or a soft and delight-seeking animal soul, it's an animal and it needs to be sacrificed. That's the takrivu min habehema min habakar min hatzein, which is the reaction to the other ki yakriv. Each person must sacrifice his animal soul to make worthwhile the adam ki yakriv that comes on high in the particular nature of their particular animal soul. Kol echad, each one lefima the other benafshe, based on his nature and tendency, muhusa, his essence, v'tivei, and his personality, kach yidalachafia, one should see to bend. Mi dazu, this attribute, v'oz yidavar ameskayim b'chuli, and only then will it be something which is permanent and something which is lasting. So the Maamar is saying 2 steps. Step 1, God inspires. Step 2, don't simply respond, bring your animal along. There's a 3rd step. And the 3rd step is going to be discussed in the subsequent page, which is the last page of this Maamar. And I'm going to do this separately. And since, of course, my middle name is Suspense, I'm terrible at suspense. So I'll tell you what's going to happen. The Alter Rebbe is going to say, God inspires the godly soul. We sacrifice the animal soul. But you know what? You can sacrifice the animal soul so thoroughly that the passions are quieted. And then you have another experience of godly soul, a deeper quiescence. But the latter experience of godly soul is not an escapist experience of the godly soul. It's not how you're experiencing the godly soul without the animal soul, but after the animal soul has been transformed. I'm going to leave this for next time.